What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time? Reshma, great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So you've done a ton in your career, and it hasn't been very long yet. So I'm really fascinated to dig into your story. First, I was watching your TED Talk earlier today about running for Congress. Can you share a little bit about that backstory and what made you want to do that and what you learned from running?
So I always wanted to serve. My parents came here as refugees. I had this really romantic view about politics. I worked on my first campaign when I was like 18, and I always thought that I would run for office. I graduated, though, $300,000 in student loan debt. So I moved to New York City thinking I'd work for the man for a bit, get a job at one of those fancy law firms, and then I could go be a public servant. And I guess I really never read my student loan statements because, I barely made a dent in my interest payments, and it was 10 years later. And I was stuck in this job that I hated, in a life I didn't want. And I finally found the courage to just quit. And instead of getting another job I hated, I decided I was going to run for Congress. And I was really naive because I really thought I ran against a 18-year Democratic incumbent. I thought I could shake every hand, meet every voter. And back then, I ran in 2010. Democrats didn't challenge each other in primaries. Like it was like a no-no. But I did it, and I had no idea what I was doing. Like I had never raised money before. I had never stood in front of a room full of senior citizens and given a speech before. I'd never gone on television before. Like everything was like doing it for the very first time. And it was the most amazing experience. And I lost spectacularly. I mean, it wasn't even close to being crushed. So I was broke, humiliated. I had pissed off everybody in the Democratic establishment. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I realized that failure doesn't have to break you.
Mm-hmm. And so I assume looking back, what would you have done differently, if anything?
I wasn't in control of my own narrative. I wasn't, I did one of my very first interviews with the New York Times, and I said this. I was trying to make the point. Here I was, this daughter of refugees. I had no money in my bank account. I was working in corporate America because I needed to pay my loans and my parents' mortgage. And I had this line in my stump speech of basically saying I want to bridge Wall Street and Main Street. And this was 2008, right? When everything was crashing down, Occupy Wall. It was the wrong message or the wrong time to say anything of nuance. And that reporter just latched onto that. And I became, this Wall Street candidate, again, running against a multimillionaire. It was crazy. And I didn't fight back.
Mm.
I just let it go, and I let myself be defined.
Mm.
So I have a lot of regrets around that because I lost control of my own narrative.
How does someone maybe who's earlier in their career, maybe they have a bit of imposter syndrome or they're scared, how do you gain control over the narrative of your career, your life in general, really?
I mean, I think you just live authentically, right? And honestly and openly. I don't now, how many ever years later, 12, 15 years later, I don't, I say what I think and what I
Mm-hmm.
believe. Listen, I make enemies. I get in trouble. I have people who don't like that. But then I have no regrets. And
Mm-hmm.
I learned that if you can speak truth and you can speak authentically, that you can just, and, you can define your own narrative.
Yeah. Is that easier to do now, though, that you've accomplished so much, where someone who hasn't written best-selling books and given TED Talks that have been viewed millions of times and started multiple organizations that have changed the world. Like, is it easier now for you than it would be someone who hasn't accomplished all of that stuff over the past decade?
It's actually harder, right? Because you have cancel culture still. You still have, what I mean. It's you have more people paying attention or to what I'm saying and
Yeah.
how I'm saying it and every little thing. So in many ways, I think actually as people have more power or as they have more a bigger platform, they're even more careful. They're
Oh,
even more less like. That's why people always say to me like, I speak honestly about my marriage, about my miscarriages, about my fertility, about my failure, about my loss, about my insecurities, about the things I'm thinking about. People always be like, "Oh my God, I can't." It's so refreshing. I'm like, really? Like, because I can't imagine being any other way.
yeah. Gotcha. So as you progress, we get to launching Girls Who Code. I remember reading a lot about this when it came out. It was like just so cool, and I wanted to talk to you then. I remember, and so that's why I'm glad I'm getting a chance to talk to you now. What was the impetus for Girls Who Code, and what was it like launching that?
I mean, this failed congressional bid. I would, when I was running for office, I just went to computer science classes and robotics labs in schools and literally would see lines and lines and lines of boys and not a girl in sight. And because I wasn't a computer scientist or a programmer, I didn't get it. I'm like, where are the girls? Like, where are the people of color? Like, what's going on here? And when I lost my congressional race, I was really moved by that experience in like the voters I met, the dreams people had, the commitments that I wanted to keep. And I was like, okay, what is one issue that I saw on the campaign trail that I want to do something about? And I kept thinking about those classrooms. I kept thinking about those classrooms that didn't have girls. And so basically, after I lost, I decided I was not going back to the private sector. I got a job being the deputy public advocate of New York City. And during my breakfast, during lunch and dinner, I would just meet with everybody that had anything to do with computer science and education. I met with PhDs in computer science education. I met with teachers. I met with people who had built nonprofits before. Like, I just literally absorbed and learned everything about, well, why weren't there women in tech? And okay, if we have to build a pipeline, how do you build a pipeline? What's a good intervention? Do you build it in a school? Is it in a summer camp? Like, how many people? How do you do it? And it took me 2 years, and I kind of would just I pieced it together. And 2 years later, I'm like, I'm gonna basically build a summer camp inside a technology company with 20 girls, and I'm gonna teach them how to code,
Hmm.
and I'm gonna see what happens.
It feels to me like it caught fire, and so there's a lot to learn. Obviously, about what you're actually doing is amazing, but just for any leader or any person who's trying to build something, I feel like there's a lot to learn. What would you attribute all of the ways? Like, I feel like you could teach like a marketing class or a builder's class on how to catch fire and have this idea almost go viral. I don't know if that's the right word, but
Yeah.
spread like that to so many. So for those who are trying to do something like that, what were the things that you did that led your idea to spread so big and so fast?
Yeah, I mean, I've had this experience twice now in my life, which is very interesting, both with Girls Who Code and now with Marshall Plan for Moms. And so I think one of the things is I do I can see into the zeitgeist a little bit. And so and I love like gnarly problems. So part of me was just like, wait, why aren't girls coding? Like, what's the big deal? What's going on here? And it irritated me. And I wanted to understand it. Same with moms. You know what I mean? Why are we pushing moms out of the job market? What's going on here? Like, this is weird. Like, and I wanted to understand it. And I think in understanding it, because I've been a storyteller, and I've been public speaking since I was like 12, I learned how to tell other people's stories. So I could put people in the shoes of a young girl of color who lived in Compton or the Bronx that was brother had, was dyslexic, what I mean, or father dying in cancer, and why coding was connected to, why she wanted to learn how to code because she wanted to save her daddy's life. Today I can put people in the shoes of a mother, what I mean, who lost her job, and who has three young kids and is, hybrid home Zoom schooling them. And like, again, every dream, every thought, every pain, everything she's going through. So I'm always telling other people's stories, and getting people to be like, that's not right. We should
Yeah.
do something about that. And so I think that that is something that like I have learned, I mean, how to do, I guess, over the course of years of doing that. And I think the second thing is those I ran for Congress and I lost my congressional race, but then I ran again for public advocate and I lost my public advocate race. And there's nothing like failure in putting a chip on somebody's shoulder.
Mm.
And for me, you have to remember, I was that little girl. All I wanted to do was serve. All I
Mm.
wanted to do was give back and help people. And I have two races where I'm like, why won't you let me? Like, why won't you let me? Okay, fine. I'm going to do it anyway.
Mm.
And so, if you think about athletes, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, it's like they were great because early in their career, they didn't get first draft pick or they didn't make that 3-point shot. And they never, ever, ever let that moment go for them. And they
Mhm.
always had a chip on their shoulder. And it's the same for social entrepreneurs. Like for
Mhm.
me, I was like, okay, like you're not going to elect me to teach girls to code. I'm going to teach a million of them. Just watch me.
Yeah.
And so that was a lot of what was going on with me with Girls Who Code was I was relentless,
Mhm.
and I would say the last thing is I just love girls. I love women. I have this emotional connection. And maybe it was because I was a working class girl and the daughter of immigrants and I had to work hard and I didn't have things and I saw my parents struggle and I believe in the American dream, that I see what my potential was in each and every single one of them.
Mhm.
And, similar now with mothers, I just see how there's so many women who have so much inside of them that they want to do so much, but so much pain that they've been through, so much trauma that and all they want to do is be seen.
Mhm.
All they want someone to do is, I see you.
Yeah.
And
S-
so I think for me, it's like it resonates and with me deeply.
You mentioned your parents. What did your parents do? What was your upbringing like?
Well, both my parents were engineers, but my father was a machinist in the plant. My mother sold cosmetics before, but they were came as refugees, so they had no money, and they were just strivers and
What
survivors.
made them come here?
Well, they were kicked out of Uganda in 1973. So there's this dictator Idi Amin that basically woke up one day and expelled all of the Ugandan Asians from the country. And so all of my parents' family, my parents were born in Uganda, my grandparents were born in Uganda, and so like overnight they were like torn away from their family and everything they knew. But they were lucky because they were two of 1,000 refugees that got to come to the United States. So they show up in Chicago, Illinois. Basically, they don't know anybody. They don't speak the language. They don't know the culture. It's the 1970s, the 1980s, and they really there's no one who has more barbecues than my dad. Like he believes in the American dream deeply, and that's what we were raised in.
Wow. So you got to witness that and feel that your entire upbringing.
Yeah, and I think I was raised as a girl whose name was Reshma in a town in the Midwest in Schaumburg, Illinois, where everyone's name was Rachel and Ron and Jennifer and Joe.
Yeah.
I had a mom who wore saris and, parents who spoke, Gujarati and, we were Hindus, you know what I mean? And I grew up in a community that of all, Christians. So it was a lot of like not being nowhere close to fitting in. And, my parents were not, my sister and I laugh, like we were not wearing the coolest clothes. You know what I mean? Like everything was like Kmart and Sears. And as I mean, like middle school, high school, that's rough. But all of that experience and totally totally has made me, who I am today, and I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah. How do you, now that you've probably created economic security for yourself and your family, how do you teach your kids that grit that you developed, that work ethic, that resilience, that we don't have the nicest stuff, right? Now that you're able to provide that, how do you teach that to your kids?
I know, I think about this every day.
Me
Because,
too.
I had a job since I was 12. Baskin Robbins, Express, retail, Subway, you name it.
Yeah.
Dog walking. I did it. Like all my loans, all my name. You know what I mean? My parents never bought me a car, paid for my apartment,
Wow.
like none of that, right? I went to public schools, state school for college. So, but because of that, I am gritty. I have a strong work ethic. I never flew first class until I was in my 40s because somebody else bought me a ticket. You know what I mean? Or stayed in a night out was like Taco Bell and Pizza Hut. So and I think so much of who I am today is because of that,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And that's why, like, even now in New York City, my son goes to public school. I did not want him to go to private school,
Hmm.
even though I could afford it, because
Mhm.
I want him to grow up at least in some way in the way that I grew up, right?
Mhm.
Around just salt of the earth people who are just working hard every day, you
Yeah.
know? And so I think you have to be very intentional,
Yeah.
would be very intentional. I had like one toy, you know what I mean? I didn't get to order things from Amazon every week. And I think, there are times where I'm just like, wait a minute, why do I have a new Transformer toy here? You know what I mean? And I'm doing that because part of me is like wants to give him things that I didn't have. So I just think that you have to be very intentional about it.
Yeah. For sure. Now, the statistics on this are just amazing. If we fast forward a bit to the number of women that have left the workplace, I believe 2.3 million in the last year, right? So like 30 years of progress, like gone, right? Pandemic. I know this in my own home. As much as I tried to help, my wife took the brunt of that
Yeah.
when it came to homeschooling and everything. And I know you write about this. Uh, like walk us through your mindset as you're writing this book called Pay Up, your next book that's out
Yeah.
now, and it's in the middle of this where you have two full-time jobs essentially,
Yeah.
right? You have the day shift and then the night shift.
Yeah.
You have your kids and you have your job. It's like what's your mindset as you're writing this book, working
Yeah.
multiple jobs?
I'm exhausted and
Yeah,
pissed.
yeah,
Listen, I mean, for me, I started 2020. Girls Who Code had a Super Bowl ad. I was having my second child and I was having him be a surrogate because I have autoimmune issues. And so I was so looking forward to just loving him, kissing him, being with him. And then the pandemic hit. And I found myself having to go back to work, and save Girls Who Code from being shut down.
mm,
So I'm taking care of a newborn, homeschooling, a kindergartner, and running a team. You know what I mean? And most of my executive team were all working moms. And what we were saying to each other on Zoom was just let's just hold on. Let's just hold on. So when September comes, the schools are going to open. And when the schools open, we'll get a minute to do that project, to raise that money, to launch that thing. And then when September rolled around and the schools didn't open, and they announced something called hybrid learning or Zoom schooling, where you were going to have to log on your kid at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and 11 o'clock. The first thing I thought to myself was like, aren't they going to ask us? And Ryan, it was such a naive thought because the reality is that they knew, these policymakers knew, because they had March, April, May, and June, and they knew who, like your house, my house, was doing the homeschooling, who was having to supplement, you know what I mean, their paid labor for who was supposed to having to say to their bosses, hey, I can't log on at 9, or sorry, one more second, I gotta go like all that judgment, all that discrimination, all of that comes with being the person who's responsible. We knew that it was women
yep,
and we did it anyway. And so
mm,
then you started to see these millions of women, be literally pushed out of the workforce. And my first thought was like, where's the plan? Because as you said, like we lost those millions of jobs overnight. And when we started the pandemic, 51% of the labor force was female. The latest jobs report, there are 27 times more men in the workforce than female. So you
Wow.
switched it, you know what I mean, in the course of 2 years. And so I wrote this book really also on just frustration, anger, and epiphany. For me, even though I've been working on women and girls issues basically my whole life, I really did buy into the girl boss myth. I really did buy into, like, if I leaned in hard enough, if I worked hard enough, I could just get that corner office. You know what I mean? And I bought, and it was only in the pandemic that, like, someone who has support, it nearly broke me. And I learned the hard way that, like, having it all is just a euphemism for doing it all. And
Yeah.
that this isn't about getting a mentor or a sponsor or color coding art. We need to fix the structure, not just for women, but for men, for all of us.
Mhm. What are some of the first things you would do to fix the structure? Right. I loved reading about it's. You're right. Like the euphemism of having all do it all, and that falls on your shoulders, and that's just tough. And I think as a guy, I'm really cognizant of this, of thinking like, what can I do to be a
Yeah,
part of the solution? So, what
yeah,
are some of the things that we could do? What message could we spread so that it just becomes normal, right?
yeah,
That it's not like a giant initiative; it just becomes the way it is. What are some of the
yeah.
first things we could do?
And it helps everybody. I
Right.
think the things that we're arguing for working moms are going to help everybody. I think we all want the same things. That's what's so fascinating. And
Yep.
all the data and all the work, people always say, well, how do men feel about this? I'm like, they agree. They
Right.
want the same thing. This is not a gender issue.
Yep.
This is not a, like, oh, we got to, this is a real structural issue. Like, we got to get capitalism, you know what I mean, on board, not get men on board. And so, I think the first thing is we have to learn that the pandemic was an eye opener in many ways, that workplaces weren't working for families, or quite frankly, working for anybody. Basic things like, why is the workday 9 to 5 and the school days 8 to 3? And that if we gave people more flexibility, more predictability over their schedules, that they could actually do the things that they want to. So many men say to me, I like taking my kid to school.
Hmm.
I don't want to commute 2 hours to work and see my kid for 30 minutes, maybe when I tuck them in at night. I want something different. So I think allowing, let's stop having the same fight about return to work, not to return to work. We're going to give people flexibility and predictability in their schedules. Now the question is, how do we design it so we don't create a two-tier system where all the men are in the office and all the women are home doing Zoom, doing laundry in between Zoom. The second thing is, we got to start paying for people's childcare. We
Hmm.
have to start subsidizing childcare. Childcare is the largest cost center for many families. It's like healthcare used to be, where, like, if your job didn't provide healthcare, you couldn't work, because one big healthcare emergency and you were done for.
Hmm.
And so most people pay more for their childcare than they pay for their mortgage. It is a major decision factor in the choices. Do we go on vacation? Do we buy this home? Do we, what do we send him to school? What do we do? Because of the exorbitant cost of childcare. Think about my own family. My parents couldn't afford the $50 a week for childcare. And so we were latchkey kids. Again, in a community, in a neighborhood that wasn't always friendly to us. And we would run out, my sister and I would run home from school when we were 7 and 10. And I think about my mother at 3:45 every day as she was sitting at her desk and worrying about us, and the unconscionable choices that so many families have to make because childcare is so expensive. So that has to change. And then finally, I really feel like we need to incentivize men to take paid leave, or at least stop gaslighting them when they do. Again, I think that men want to be there to take care of the baby. It's a
Hmm.
different time now. But
Hmm.
I often hear from a lot of my friends that they get gaslit, from HR, from their bosses, from their peers, when they're like, yeah, I'm going to take my 6 months leave too, or I'm going to take my 3 months leave too. And so we have to change the culture here. And I think companies have to start incentivizing men to take it, because, again, the thesis of this book is that the only way we get to equality in the workplace is if we get to equality at home. And I think about my own marriage, and I married the guy that did the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry. Now he's a much better cook than I could ever be. You know what I mean? And then when we had our first kid, Sean, I took my leave and he didn't. And my to-do list went like this, and his went like this, because suddenly I knew where all the stuff was. So it
Yep.
was much easier for me to do it when you know where all the stuff is.
I I think Salesforce is one of those companies that's getting better at this. There are some. Do you think this should be from companies or from the government or a mixture of both? I'm talking about the leave part. Like, what would be the best way to go about doing it?
I mean, the government should absolutely pass paid leave, but I don't have faith in them anymore to grow a
Yeah,
heart. And I don't think
yeah,
we can wait for them.
yeah,
And so I think what's interesting is we have this moment with the great resignation and 11 million jobs open in the talent war for them to something shifted. I would say in the past 20 years, when I think about my own parents, both of them worked at the same company for like 30 years.
yeah,
Bosses knew my name. We went to the family company picnics. It was about family. Sometimes like you work there, your son worked there, like it was about family. And then I feel like in the past decade, 2 decades, we've been treating workers like they're robots and
hmm
just expendable people. And we got to get back to, and that's why you have such high attrition rates that people just leave. Remember, it was like you'd have a gap in we used to be so nervous about having a gap in your resume because you'd be like, what do you think? Now people are like, yeah, yeah, I'm here for a year. I'm going to go there for a year. I'm going to go here. But it's not their fault. It's because they're treated a certain. So I think when you start investing in people and their families, they stay.
yeah. I think of this though. So I grew up working in sales, and in sales, you kind of are what your number is. I was a telephonic sales guy initially, so like we're all in the same office, and there is a number literally by your name, and that's your production. That's the value that you are to your company. And so I remember having my first child, a a feeling of like I have to get back in there because if I don't, my number just goes like this, and that's like the worth that I am to the company, and that's how it felt. And in a way, I mean that was reality because the ones who had higher numbers got brought up on stage and sent to Hawaii and paid a bunch of money and got promoted. And so my thinking is, well, I'm a provider for my family. I need to take care of them. I need to earn, right? And that's a tough pressure. And so I was back really quick. What so for people who have that mindset, like I'm trying to add value to my company to make money, to support, right? Like, what do you think about that?
Like we should like this. It's the same thing. So they have these things called like like promotions are about time, how long you've been there, and then if you have a gap, you basically lose that time. And
Yeah,
I think we need to basically root those policies out. So if you're in sales and you take a 6 month gap in a year because you're with your kid, that shouldn't you should still be up on stage.
yeah, yeah,
You know, you know what I mean? I think we just need to think about all the ways this bias might show up or the like I literally want every company to do an audit of all of their policies, not just their HR, but things like this. And
yep,
say, where are the places that we are disincentivizing men to take leave, to participate in the family, all the ways. Where are all the ways this is showing up? Whether it's sales, how we account for sales, whether it's after work happy hour, you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
All of the ways that we are disincentivizing and discouraging men to be with their families.
yeah,
Because I actually think that this view that well, men actually just want to be at the office, they don't want to be at home. I don't think that's true. I think men want to take their kids to Little League. They want to participate in these things. But like you said, they're supposed to be the provider.
yep,
They're
yep,
supposed to, and so when you see even health studies, when men take more care for their kids, they live longer. They don't have diabetes. They don't have heart attack. It's good for them. The amount of men who've said, Reshma, I just quit my job instead of saying that I don't want to commute to the office. Because we have this, again, toxic masculinity that makes men feel that way. That's wrong.
yeah.
Like
I do.
my husband loves to be with the boys,
Yeah.
loves to be with the boys. You know what I mean? Loves taking them to basketball, loves doing these things. And I can't imagine him. You know what I mean? He would be miserable if it could be anything other than that.
Do you think the one good thing that's happening is this more work from anywhere type of a mentality that the pandemic helped in a way where so many companies now that used to be like, oh, you work in this office or that office or you live close to this one, so you got to be there a few times. Whereas now, this happened to my wife's company. We're like, we don't care. Like you
Do
work
what you
from
want.
wherever you want, whenever you want. Yes, we're gonna get together every once in a while to like quota club for the people who do it or whatever. They get together at most quarterly. And you don't have to go to those even too. They're optional. Like, and so in a way, it's awesome.
Absolutely.
What do you think about that aspect that it seems that more companies are doing?
I mean, I hope it continues. I
Yeah.
I feel like we're going to be faked out. I don't know.
Ah.
I feel like it's like they're because if you know, it's like sure we're going to do this 2 days a week thing now, but we're going to review in September. And there's a handful of companies that have been brave enough to say this is the way that it's going to be. But I think the reality is we got to experiment.
Yeah.
And nothing should be knee jerk. And if we're going to do that, we're going to also say, okay, we're going to measure productivity, we're going to measure happiness, we're going
Hmm.
to measure time with family. Like we should be experimenting right now and measuring things.
Hmm.
I think what feels a little like, is like, I remember reading all these studies during the pandemic of like, oh, remote work's amazing. We're more productive than ever. The stock market is booming. And then out of nowhere, everyone's like, well, come back to work. Well, why? Why?
Hmm.
And no one really answered the why besides this kind of like lofty, it's better for us to collaborate. And I'm building my startup right now, Marshall for Moms nonprofit. We're all remote. And
Hmm.
I'm not saying that it's like not easy, it's easy sometimes to walk into somebody's office and you're there, but we talk all the time,
Hmm.
and we're just we do very intentional about what culture feels like and looks like.
Hmm. You there are notes about what other wealthy countries have instituted what they call parental or child allowances,
Yeah.
like Austria, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Iceland, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the UK. Like, what do you think about this and how some of the things that those countries are doing could be potentially implemented here?
It all should be implemented here.
Hmm.
They don't have, again, they don't have the same mental health crisis.
Yep.
Their kids, don't have the same issues, in mental health either. They didn't have the same exodus of women leaving the labor force, right? And so most of those countries we talked about have affordable childcare. The United States offers like less than $500 a family for childcare. The average in developing nations is like 15,000. We're
Wow.
the only nation.
Why do you think that is? What is it that about the U.S. that it got us here?
I think we've always viewed childcare as a personal issue that you have to solve and fix.
And other countries do not.
In other countries do not because they see it as an economic issue, and it is an economic issue. You can't. And again, what I think the United States hasn't caught up to is like we don't live in a country anymore where you need dual income, right? Like
Yeah.
we both got to work to pay the bills. There is no like, hey, maybe I could stay at home, and you can't do that. Things are too
Hmm.
expensive. Hello, inflation.
Hmm.
So I think we, used to feel like the model was a man in the workplace, a woman staying at home, and so she's taking care of the kids. So we don't need the government to subsidize your childcare because you have somebody. And we've moved away from that so long ago, and policy is just not caught up.
Hmm.
So, the entire model of childcare is very broken in terms of its expense, in terms of like its availability. It's, even right now, 50% of childcare centers in the country are shut down. So
Hmm.
most people I know are literally every day childcare is like a challenge, regardless in some ways of their income strata, right? It's like we're all kind of dealing with it.
Hmm.
So the government has got to get involved. And I'm sorry, and if the government can't get involved, I think the private sector has to get involved. And in many ways, I think the private sector getting involved in childcare might be better because it might force us to innovate. I want to see more startup companies thinking about how to solve the business model of childcare.
Hmm.
I want to see more ideas, more innovations, more things that we could actually be doing.
What about this idea of parenting loudly?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for so long we've had to hide our motherhood, and we've been asked to. Like, think about pregnancy. Most women in the workforce will say, I got pregnant. Okay, I'm not going to tell my employer until the last possible second."
Hmm.
And why are you doing that? You're doing that because you know that the minute you tell somebody you're pregnant, you might be discriminated against. You might get a project taken away from you. You might get fired, right? You're going to be treated differently. What does that say about our culture?
Hmm.
And so what we need to do is parent out loudly. We don't apologize when you're, what I mean, taking your kid to a doctor's appointment or to the zoo. Like, don't shut your video off when your kid interrupts your call. say, like, I oftentimes when I'm public speaking, I will bring my little baby up on stage, and they interrupt every single one of my, what I mean, of my talks and of my speeches if they're home. And that's my life. I'm a mom,
Yeah.
and I'm not hiding it. And
Yeah.
so, and I think men have to do the exact same thing. And I think they do it. It's easier sometimes for men to do it because you're praised for it more than we are.
Right.
And that's what has to change.
Yeah. So good. One more question. Let's say somebody is a recent college graduate and they maybe within the last couple of years, and they want to leave a dent in the world. They want to do good. They want to leave a positive impact. What are some general pieces of life/career advice you'd give to that person?
So, I mean, for me, stay curious. So much of the things that I've done in terms of the movements I've built were because I was like, wait, why are moms discriminated against? Like, why do we have that? So I do a lot of learning, a lot of reading. I love meeting people who do not believe in the same things that I believe.
Hmm.
Like, I am super, super, super curious, and I'm curious about people who are very different and have very different experiences than I am. The second thing is that you don't have to be an expert to solve a problem. I literally started a movement to teach girls to code when I don't code, and I didn't bother to learn. I'm
Yeah.
not going to sit here and say to you, yeah, I now. No, that was not my role. You know what I mean? In running and building this business. Um, and the third thing is, I was just yesterday, I was just sitting there, I'm like, I'm so lucky. I love what I do. And I love that I get to be, and that doesn't mean that it's fun. I'm like, I'm having one of those days today where I'm like, I'm gonna kill somebody, right? It doesn't mean it's fun all the time. But when you do something that you love, which I think you do too, I think you do what you love, it makes the rest of life wonderful. I feel
Yeah.
like I can really plug in with my kids. I
Yeah.
feel like I can really enjoy a night out with my girlfriends, right? It's like work is work, and it's fun and it's interesting, and it's not, I gotta go into the office. You know what I mean? And so look for that in life because I think you
Yeah.
can find it.
Yeah.
It took
So,
me, I didn't find it till I was like third, mid
I think
late 30s, but I
Well,
found it.
I think some of that takes time, right? Because the
Yeah.
way you learn is you got to do stuff. Like you got to
Yeah.
take action. I feel like that's the biggest way you learn. The action kind of precedes the motivation, the passion, the love. Because sometimes you don't know, and one of the best ways to learn is to actually go and do it.
Absolutely. And to do things you hate,
Yeah,
right? Or don't like.
yeah,
And I got here by having a lot of jobs. I was like, "No, I don't want to do that.
yeah,
And so, and I think that that's a gift too.
yeah. That's a when I work with leaders, I'm like, we do the good boss, bad boss exercise, and usually you got to like have some bosses in order to be able to do that exercise. They're like, oh, now I realize what a great one is versus one that's not so great. That just takes some time. That takes some action. You know. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, Reshma. The book's called "Pay Up: The Future of Women and Work and Why It's Different Than You Think." It's out now. I encourage people to get it. You could tell that you put a lot of thought and care and intentionality into this, and that this is what you love and are passionate about. So I think that
Proudest thing I've ever written. So yes,
awesome.
thank
That's awesome. It comes through loud and clear. I really appreciate you investing the time with me today.
thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.